and us less safe in the way that they are doing it.
Sir Richard Dalton joins me before I get to your calls, which are coming in already. Former British Ambassador to Iran, former Consul General to Jerusalem, and former Associate Fellow at Chatham House Middle East and North Africa programme. Good afternoon to you, Sir Richard.
Good afternoon.
Alicia Kearns' comments there about what it means to be a friend of Israel. Clearly within the party, and I think within the country, there are differences of opinion as to what that means or should mean.
There may be, but we should be guided by the long-standing principles of international law, United Nations Security Council resolutions, and our own historic responsibility. And if the Israeli government acts continually in a way that undermines our fundamental principles about a fair and just settlement in the Middle East, then we have to dissociate ourselves from it. And as Alicia Kearns said in that interview, it's frustrating, I would say disgraceful, shameful, that it's taken 6 months for any measure of firmness to have entered into the US and UK positions.
So do you think, I mean, we've been hearing, particularly from David Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, he's been tougher than some Conservative colleagues of his would like in his messaging to Israel. What could have been done, should have been done sooner, both by the UK and the US, in your view?
Well, it's been obvious for months that Israel's policy has been indiscriminate. Even President Biden has said that, yet we have not reacted. It's been obvious that they've been using starvation as a weapon. It's been obvious that the ICJ is right to say that accusations of acts of genocide are plausible. What we should have done earlier was sharpen our language, put our bilateral relationship closer to the line by endorsing what the International Court of Justice has said, rather than trying to sidestep it. I mean, we gave a carte blanche to Israel back in October, and one understands the emotional reaction, but it was never soundly based in policy. We should then and should now recognize that a military defeat of Hamas in Gaza is not 100% achievable, and that you cannot extirpate the urge to resist intolerable conditions by the kind of strategy which Israel has adopted.
If Israel starts to, I mean, soften is the wrong word because everything about this is hard-edged, isn't it? But if Israel begins to soften its approach, just to use that shorthand, we have to remember there are two sides to this war, as in any war. If Israel softens its approach, there will be some people who say, well, look, you're making life easier for Hamas. Is that an acceptable price for making life easier for the people of Gaza, which, of course, we want?
We should have recognized some time ago, and we should now recognize that Hamas has been immensely degraded by the campaign so far. And we should state clearly that enough is enough. The policy now seems to be short-term measures, immediate ceasefire, release of hostages, flooding Gaza with aid, and no wholesale action against Rafah. Well, that's good. There's a medium-term plan, which is a permanent ceasefire, a long-term plan, a political strategy. That seems to be where the British government now is. And along with the Americans, who are talking about the need for action in hours, not days, I mean, one has to say better late than never. But the key is whether the United States has got the willingness to see through its conditionality. It's now saying that there must be a link between Israel's immediate action to protect civilians and the continuation of US support. So the risks now are that there would be no immediate ceasefire and release of hostages, that the Israeli government will open additional routes into Gaza, but won't use them properly. They will maintain their foot firmly on the hosepipe, restricting the flow, which is what they've done since they declared.
They claim Hamas is also restricting flow and stealing what goes in. Do you not accept that?
Well, the Israelis have totally destroyed any capability of Gazans to govern themselves. So when people are facing starvation, there's bound to be a measure of rioting over the limited food supplies that are available. That would happen in London if we were faced with similar considerations.
So if, and we know that the talks between Egypt and Qatar, the mediation between Egypt and Qatar is going on as we speak, and let's hope something can come of that. If we get to the point where there is a cessation of firing, essentially, let's call it that, so that the aerial and man-to-man, woman-to-man combat stops, things improve to a degree. What then do you think? Who goes in then? Who, if goes in is the right term, who enters the fray then to try to get us even a few steps closer to that political solution, if there is one?
The conversation has thrown up several possibilities. Israel would stay, Arab countries would step in, an international force, possibly with some Western participation, but relying heavily on local Arab armies as well. They would step in. Local leaders would somehow arise. It's completely unclear which of these is feasible. But really, we've got to get to the stage in which the fighting has finished. And we mustn't forget that in the reckoning that's going to take place as to Israel's non-adherence to international law, the way in which they conducted their bombing campaigns and the long-term legacy of that has to be taken into account. And these recent stories about the killing of aid workers and the letters calling on the British government to change its policy and protect international law, because that's in our interest to do so and it's the right thing to do. This has rather overshadowed the revelations that it wasn't just Hamas fighting in urban areas, but it was Israel identifying homes in which they thought there might be a Hamas adherent, and then proceeding to bomb the building in which that single Hamas adherent lived, even though they knew that the families in apartments around, above and below that fighter were going to be slaughtered. And even though the Hamas fighter in question did not have an arm in his hand. So this appalling way of conducting war must be re-examined in the Western context of how wars in these circumstances have to be conducted in accordance with law.
When the IDF and the Israeli government says, in response to what you've just said, when they say, as they do repeatedly, and I don't know about you, but I'm certainly not in a position to say the truth or otherwise of this, but when they say, as they do repeatedly, Hamas is so deeply embedded within the civilian population, this is an impossible war to carry out in the way that you might wish.
Well, that's not the opinion of military analysts who draw attention to the use of 2,000-pound dumb bombs on those buildings that I was describing just now as leading to a ratio of fighter to civilians killed, which would not be accepted in Western warfare elsewhere, and which has been, by the admission of some of the Israeli intelligence operators of this artificial intelligence targeting system, to have been conducted without the kind of safeguards which the Israeli government continually tells us out of the other side of its mouth that it has in place.
With more than the Netanyahu government in mind, are you a friend of Israel?
I'm a friend of a just and fair settlement for both peoples, which is long overdue. The way to do it has been sketched out. The chief problem is that Israel has always preferred acquiring more land to achieving peace, and they're at it right now in annexing new areas of the Jordan Valley. So I can't be a friend of an Israeli government that has undertaken this kind of activity through the oppression both in Gaza and the West Bank for so long. I see myself as a friend of both Israeli and Palestinian peoples.
Thank you very much indeed for your time today, Sir Richard Dalton, former British ambassador to Iran, former Consul General to Jerusalem, and a former Associate Fellow at Chatham House's Middle East and North Africa programme.